Hi folks, you should be able to hear me momentarily. There are undoubtedly going to be a few map questions. I'm not going to obviously tell you
Hi
which
folks,
one.
you should be able to
but there will
hear
be
me
some map questions in
momentarily.
particular related to the
There
world
are
around
undoubtedly
1500.
going to be a few
Oh, I'm
map
gonna turn
questions.
off
I'm not going to
sound
obviously.
here. So there will be some questions around the world in 1500, and then also some questions kind of like the one we did in class, this last class, where you would analyze the map and come up with a couple answers to some of these questions. Okay, so for starters, let's go back. I'm going to open up my other page here again real quick. So the quiz is going to be, I should hopefully not be echoing anymore. Is that right? I think there was for a second there, but I should be good. If I'm echoing still, let me know. I can try to fix it. Cool. All right, so since I'm good now, let's kind of get rolling. The quiz is going to be about 35 questions. I think it's actually 35 questions on the dot. They're all going to be multiple choice, so no writing yet for you guys. As far as retakes go, they don't allow retakes for these quizzes. However, you will be allowed to do corrections, so many times you're going to get enough points back that it says pretty much as good as doing a retake anyway, since you clearly can't get above an 80 on retakes for anyway. So let's look at the world in 1500, because that is what part of the things you're going to need to know. So hopefully we can run through this all real quickly, and if you come up with any questions as we go, then that'll be good. So let's look at the world in 1500. Actually, not quite yet. So anyway, look at the world in 1500, right? So we have the Aztec Empire. We know is going to be here in Mexico. So don't remember that. You've got the Mayan influence kind of down over here. And you have the Incas down here in South America, are the big empires over in the Western Hemisphere that you are responsible for knowing, right? We also have England right here. Whoops. We've got this is going to be Spain right here. We've got France. We've got the Songhai Empire right here. We have the Ottoman Empire right here. We've got the Mughals, which is India and in modern day India. And then we have Ming China, and you've got the 1420s right here. It's a similar map, ultimately by 1500. Okay, so those are the big places you should remember. So I would suggest studying. I kind of posted this link earlier in our classroom, so it wouldn't be a bad idea to kind of look through these questions or look through these places in the world, again, just to be familiar with them. Okay. So let's kind of run through the Renaissance stuff again, and probably go through at least the Reformation stuff, the early Reformation stuff. And since the freshest stuff is the second part that we kind of covered today and yesterday for the other classes, I don't know how much we'll run through all of that because it's pretty fresh, or should be anyway, but we'll get going here. If you have any more questions, we can obviously touch upon them. Okay, so let's look at the Renaissance. Let me bring that over to our window here. Okay, so as far as the Renaissance goes, right, we know that it comes down to this period sometime between around 1400 and 1600, right? So we have this famous picture right here, the School of Athens, where you have these famous philosophers and historians and things all kind of talking about education and reason and logic and philosophy and all of these good things. So we know that the word Renaissance means rebirth, right? It's this rebirth and resurgence of classical knowledge, and by classical we mean Roman and Greek, right? This ancient classical period that we familiarize ourselves with today, that you all probably learned quite a bit about in World History 1, right? Things that came out of there in particular, like art, architecture, music, literature, intellectual and philosophical ideas, right? And all of these things and the kind of rebirth of this knowledge is going to ultimately lead to the birth of the modern world that we know it, right? As we know it, it's going to feed into the Reformation, which is going to then feed into the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment and change the world forever. So we know for sure that the Renaissance is going to spread out of Italy, right, into Europe from Italy. The reason why Italy in particular, right, we had these big cities. They had this overseas trade, which was very rich, just from their central location in the Mediterranean. That was partially sparked by the Crusades as well, right? This is going to lead to the growth of these large city-states. And because of their location in the Mediterranean and people traveling through here, you're going to have cultural diffusion, in the words of Mr. Fox, right? This easily spreading of new ideas and things, right? So on top of that, you have these wealthy merchants and all of this classical heritage, right? If you're in Italy in the 1500s, you are literally surrounded by ancient Roman ruins in some cases, right? So by having these things around you, it's very easy to be influenced by them, right? If you see these aqueducts and you wonder how someone built them, people might actually try to kind of come up with their own architectural ideas, right? So these wealthy merchants were able to finance what are called patrons, right? Someone that's financially supported the arts and such. So they might commission someone to paint a painting or to sculpt a sculpture or to design a building for them, right? These super wealthy people in some of these city-states. So here's just a map. You're not going to probably need to be familiar with anything here in particular, but just kind of to know that Italy was broken down into your city-states, right? So you do need to know about Shakespeare, right? Shakespeare, he is one of the Enlightenment writers that we talk about. The Renaissance writers that we talk about, where he writes a number of sonnets, plays, essays, and all these things affect the way people think during the Renaissance, but even today, right? We still read them. Plays like Julius Caesar, Macbeth, Hamlet, Othello, Romeo and Juliet, all of these things are still experienced on a pretty regular basis by people, but also high schoolers as you guys read it, obviously, right? So during the Renaissance, you also get this idea of humanism, right? This humanism being this kind of belief in people being able to improve themselves through reason and logic and such, right? And being able to study these classics to improve themselves, grammar, rhetoric, being able to speak, right? Poetry, philosophy, history, educating yourselves in these make you a better person is what they're saying, right? In this humanistic approach. So naturally, the evolution is for Christian humanism, where you're going to be similarly bettering yourself and improving yourself. However, Christian humanism, instead of looking at the classics, is looking towards Scripture and the Bible and Christianity in particular, right? Hoping to bring about necessary reform. So you have this man as kind of the big Christian humanist that we talk about, a man named Desiderius Erasmus, right? And Erasmus writes this book called The Praise of Folly, where he essentially critiques Christianity and really feels that Christianity's kind of gotten away from itself and needs to return to its simpler, purer days, and that's a big deal, right? And people are going to build upon Erasmus's ideas, heading toward the Reformation that we're going to be talking about, which we talked about, and we're talking about a little more in a few minutes. Right? So he also believes that Christianity should show people how to lead good lives and just not necessarily doing what they need to do to be saved, right, and head to heaven, right? So his ideas, also he goes against pilgrimage and fast and relics, similarly to some of the other Reformation people that we talked about, right? We also talked about Machiavelli, who wrote The Prince, and The Prince is basically one of the most influential works in modern history here, where you have essentially people following this right back then and reading it and believing it, and this idea of how to kind of get and keep political power, believing that humans are motivated by self-interest, and that his whole belief is the idea that the ends justify the means, and a prince or a ruler should really do whatever necessary to act in favor of the state, right, for the state's sake, abandoning morals if necessary, right, doing what they need to do, getting their hands dirty. If it's for the good of the people in the state, right? So I would definitely familiarize yourself with him. You are going to need to know some of these artists, the Renaissance artists, as someone just kind of wrote that in there. So let's go into a few of them, right? The big ones that you need to know about are Michelangelo Buonarroti, right? He is one of these Renaissance men that we talk about, right? So he is a painter, he's a sculptor, he's an architect, and he's good at all of these things, right? He is particularly known for the Sistine Chapel, right here. My mouse, I think I can make it like a, oops, that's not what I want. I think I can make it like a, never mind, laser pointer or something like that, I think, but it's not working. So anyway, you have the Sistine Chapel, you have the David right here. and St. Peter's Basilica. So those are things that we might ask you to know in a question, right? So who painted the Sistine Chapel? Who made the David, right? Something like that might pop up. You also have Leonardo da Vinci, right? So Da Vinci is really, I think, the only other artist that you're going to need to know here. So you have Da Vinci. He's another one of these Renaissance men. He's a scientist. He's an inventor. He's an artist, right? He's most known for painting the Mona Lisa, but he's also a bit of an inventor, where he creates these kind of primitive inventions and spreads these ideas, right? So that's it for the Renaissance. It's pretty quick and painless, to be honest. So it's not very much. So the people you need to know, familiar yourself with, right? Da Vinci, you have Michelangelo, you have Machiavelli, Erasmus, and ultimately Shakespeare, right? Those are the big people. That's it. Just 5 people. That's not really that bad. Okay, so let's dive into the Reformation a little bit, unless there's any questions for the Renaissance. Oops, let me close this full screen out anyway, and then get this one over here. All right, so the Reformation, right? So we know the Reformation is really about Christianity and a split within Christianity, right? So you have the founder, Jesus Christ, right? Early Christianity we know is mostly located in Europe. We've done map work at this point to kind of show you that. The Christianity is mostly, around what's in the Bible, right? The Bible and Christianity is the Old Testament, right? And the New Testament, right? New Testament being the gospel of Jesus in particular, right? So we also know that the Roman Catholic Church had little competition during this time period, right? Around 1500, it was a strong entity, right? It had a lot of wealth, it had a lot of power, influence over the monarchs of these different countries, over these different nation states and kingdoms, right? So the church is going to grow in size during the Middle Ages, and in power and in influence and even wealth, right? And if you were a European Christian at this point, you were subject to the authority of Rome and the Pope in Rome, right? And merchants in particular, they also disliked paying taxes to Rome. They weren't particularly fond of having to do that by being under their guise a little bit. Right, we did these some maps. We're not going to need to know any of these things. This is just something that Mrs. Kipperman went over in class as far as the locations of some of the religions in a modern sense, right? So let's look at the Reformation, right? We know it's a movement of religious reform within the Catholic Church, right? It leads to the establishment of Christian churches that did not accept the authority of the Pope in Rome, right? So this is Protestantism that we were talking about in quite a bit of detail just today and yesterday, right? So these people are ultimately going to not agree with each other anymore, right? So what did people not agree with as far as the church was concerned? Let's look at it, right? So there were a few things. One of them being this whole idea of usury, right? Usury is the idea of lending interest or money at high interest rates. The merchants were angered by this as far as the church lending, okay? So with the merchants being annoyed at the church, it's one of the things that's going to help promote reform, okay? So you might need to know that word tomorrow. The usury. So Italians also, right, dominated the church. The Roman Catholic Church is based out of Rome. You have Vatican City there. The Pope is situated there, right? All of the last number of popes had been Italian, right? So if you are a German or you're English, right, and you are part of Christianity, right, that doesn't sit super well with you. So this is why the English and the Germans are kind of ripe to break away from Catholicism. So that political wealth and power of the church sometimes caused political conflict between these different groups, right? And then lastly, you have this whole idea of indulgences, right? Indulgences, the practice of paying money for forgiveness of sins, it was running rampant at this time, right? And your Christian humanists like Erasmus and then ultimately some of the other dissenters, they are going to really dislike this idea, right? They don't believe that it's within the Bible, really. Okay. So let's look at some of these people now that are going to lead Christianity and break it away into Protestantism, which is made up of different groups of Christians, basically, right? So you have Martin Luther, John Calvin, and King Henry. They break off into 3 different groups of Christianity now, right? All have similar beliefs, but they have different interpretations of the scripture, right? So Martin Luther ends up with Lutheranism, right? John Calvin is Calvinism, and King Henry VIII of England, he breaks off into the Church of England, right? Also known as Anglicanism. Okay, so Luther, right? What you need to know about Luther for sure is this idea that you can achieve salvation by faith alone. You don't need anything else. As long as you have your faith, that is good, and the Bible is the ultimate authority of the church. So all of these priests and such clergy that are living beyond their means and he thinks corrupt, right? The Bible is ultimately the major authority. And that all humans are equal before God, right? And we know that Martin Luther is going to come, and he's going to stand, to pin those 95 Theses up on the wall, up on the door of the church in Wittenberg, Germany. And this is going to be that initial split, right? You're going to have now the birth of the Protestant church. And there he is, right there. There he is pinning on the door. So next we have Calvin, right? John Calvin is another sect of Protestantism, right? And Calvin in particular is going to be dealing with this idea of predestination. So when you think of Luther, right, think of salvation by faith alone and the Bible as the ultimate authority. Those are things you might need to match up on a question tomorrow. John Calvin, right? You need to think of this idea of predestination, right? So God has kind of decided beforehand which people are going to be saved and their path in life, right? He also advocates for leading a good life, a righteous life by having a good work ethic and doing what you're supposed to do in work and things like that, right? So it's just another expansion of that Protestant movement. All right, there he is right there. And then you have King Henry, right? The Anglican Church, the Church of England, right? And he is ultimately going to not be thrilled when he is unable to produce a male heir, right? So when he blames his wife and wants to get a divorce from her, and she happens to be the daughter of the King of Spain, who is friendly with the Pope, so the Pope does not grant this divorce. It's not really within Catholic doctrine, especially back then. And ultimately, being friendly with the King of Spain, he doesn't let King Henry break up with the King of Spain's daughter, right? So King Henry VIII decides, I'm going to break away from the church anyway, right? And then heads the National Church of England, this Anglican church. So he's going to go through a number of other wives at that point, right? He has 6 wives ultimately before he ends up dying, before anything can happen to this one. But while he's alive, right, you have now the push toward Protestantism and Anglicanism and the Church of England. So they push out the Roman Catholics there, right? They take land from the Roman Catholic Church and reappropriate, I should say, for Protestant things, right? And the wealth as well that comes with it, right? Which is a pretty controversial thing at the time. And okay, there he is right there. So here is your chart of the wives. Catherine, right? Anyway, they have the daughter Mary. You have the second wife, Anne Boleyn, who's English, and also to try to get a son, but they also only have a daughter. She ends up being executed for treason as a way to get rid of her. So you have Jane Seymour, not John Seymour. She has a son actually named Edward, but she's gonna die in childbirth, and Edward will not make it much past about 15 years old or so. So when he dies, they're unable to get any more kids through multiple more wives, and then another divorce and another execution, and then King Henry dying. But when Henry dies, Mary's going to become the queen. So when she is unable to produce an heir, and she ultimately dies as well, Queen Elizabeth, will take over in England, right? So when she takes over, the Bloody Mary's husband, who is the King of Spain, Philip II, feels that he has a bit of a claim, right, to the English throne. So ultimately, he tries to invade England, gets together this whole big armada, this big navy to attack England. It doesn't go. You are not going to need to know all the wives. You're not going to really need to know any of the names of the wives, as far as I'm concerned. You just need to know that King Henry is ultimately trying to divorce his wife, and that's why you get the split. You're not going to need to know any of the names of the wives. That'd be a little harsh. So anyway, right? So Mary. So looking back at this, Mary, she was Catholic, right, under the Catholic mother. So when she is queen, she tries to return England to Catholicism, right? And she does it pretty bloody. It's pretty harsh, and she tries to really crack down, and she gets the nickname Bloody Mary. So when she dies, Elizabeth takes over, and she's Protestant as the second wife here, from the second wife here. So she reverts it back, right? And she's a bit more tolerant of people that don't necessarily agree. Okay, a bit more tolerant. She's accepting of Catholics. She's accepting of really anybody here. So there will not be any questions specifically about the wives. Okay, just to say it again, there are no questions about the wives. I'm just kind of trying to make the story, flesh the whole story out to make sense of it. Okay, so anyway, Queen Elizabeth engages in expansion, right? In colonialism, right? You're going to start to now have the New World, right? Columbus had discovered. You're going to have some exploration and colonialism that's going on, right? So she becomes the head of the Anglican Church, and she's able to defeat the Spanish king to kind of secure her claim on the throne in England. So that's it. As far as them, we already talked about Erasmus, so that won't be that big of a deal. Okay, so I can go quickly through the stuff we covered in class again today and yesterday if we really want, but again, it should be pretty fresh, so I don't know how necessary that is. So I'll get it up on the screen right here. Maybe just kind of hit some key points real quickly before we go, before we call it a night. So, whoops, hit the wrong button. Okay, so let's look at this real quickly, right? So we talked about some early dissenters too. We had kind of screwed up. So don't forget about John Wycliffe and John Huss. They're two other names you might need from the Reformation. John Wycliffe is known for translating the Bible into English, right, and becoming a heretic, going against the church's wishes. And John Huss is he's also a heretic, kind of going against the Pope and the church hierarchy in talking about communion, right, and the body and blood of Christ, and him not taking it quite so literal, and then spreading that around and ultimately being killed by being burned at the stake. The Reformation is all based around theology and Christianity, the study of God, right? The differences that come from the Protestant Reformation now is where you're going to start to get some religious hatred between the different groups and war and destruction, economic and political changes, right? So we know that Germany didn't really exist in the sense that it is today, right? You have this kind of region that's under what's known as the Holy Roman Empire, right? This loose confederation grouping of these kingdoms and principalities, right? That kind of all pay homage up the line to the Habsburgs, right? The Holy Roman Emperor and the Habsburg family. Okay, so here is your map, right? A map of kind of Germany and different kingdoms and principalities that existed there. So I'm actually going to pause real quick here, and this is where I'm going to tell you about the extra credit question. So I'm going to ask a question tomorrow, just nice and simple, and so I'm the cross-country coach, so I'm going to ask the question, where is the cross-country meet for Woodson this coming weekend? And if you are able to tell me, it's at the Oatlands Plantation, O-A-T Lands Plantation, you will get your extra credit point. So as an incentive for coming out and doing that. I don't have a zoomed out version of this map. No, I'm sorry. This is as zoomed out as it gets right here. Yeah, I can't manipulate it or zoom in or out, sadly. But anyway, hopefully you guys got that extra credit. So again, let's look back here, the principalities and things, right? So in the south here, you have the Catholicism and the Catholic Church, right? Up here, you have the more Protestant groups that are kind of breaking away. They're a bit farther away. It's going to be that one will probably be 1 point for sure. Well, which is about, if you think about it, about 3 percentage points, which is pretty good. 2.5, 3 percentage points. That's the extra credit for all the groups. But if I can see that there's only 16 people in here right now watching this, so if more than 16 people get the extra credit, I know you guys are squealing, and that you guys are, are telling your buddies something, so I can I feel I have reserve the right to retract that. So, so don't tell anybody who's not actually in here right now. So anyway, you have the Catholic Church in the south, right? The Protestants up here in the north, where you're going to be a little farther away from Rome. Oops, hit the wrong button again. All right, so we know that the princes in the north are going to try to use this as an opportunity, right? They're going to try to push against the Habsburgs. They're going to push against the Pope, and you're going to get ourselves a war, right? When the Habsburgs continue to support they can see the video later, and I'll see how many views there are and things. So if things are just odd or things don't line up, then that's kind of what I mean, okay? Anyway, so you get our 30 Years' War, and you get other religious conflicts, which are super devastating to the area, right? 4 million dead during the course of this 30 years, which is a pretty substantial percentage of the population in Germany, right? The economy is pretty ruined. The area is destroyed in many cases, right? It starts as a religious war, and it turns into a political war between France in particular and the Habsburgs in Spain. The extra credit word is Oatlands, O-A-T, lands, plantation. Oatlands, plantation. So, anyway, moving on. Cardinal Richelieu. What do we need to know about the 30 Years' War? Simply that it's devastating, right? It's a super destructive time period, and it's all based off of the Protestants and the Catholics fighting one another, right? And it starts off religious, and it turns political, in particular with France and Cardinal Richelieu, right? So this is him right there. I think I'm behind right now. So anyway, so this is the map. Right, so this is a map that we did in class, so keep in mind that you might experience something like this. I'm not saying this is the map, but something like this where you might need to read the map and analyze it for a question or two tomorrow, okay? So don't forget that. So this just shows the percentage of population, right? So a good chunk of which Germany, right? A good chunk of what's in Germany, you know, we're losing 40 to 50% of the people, right? Oh, I keep hitting the wrong button. So, anyway, the Reformation in France, right? We also know France is Catholic. You have the Catholic French. They ultimately push back against the Calvinists that are fleeing the war, heading toward France. And they get the new name Huguenots, but they get given the freedom of worship by the Catholic monarch Henry IV in 1598 from the Edict of Nantes, and you would probably need to know something about that, okay? And this ends the religious wars that are kind of happening in France at the time period. But however, this is going to be revoked a bit later by Louis XIV. About 100 years later, and this is going to then force the Huguenots to flee again. So they're kind of this persecuted group in Europe that's going to happen here, right? This is just as a repeat. Whoops. Anyway, so we also know that the Catholic Church is going to do everything in their power to kind of prevent the spread of Protestantism, right? The spread of Calvinism and Lutheranism, right, and Anglicanism. You're not going to need to know dates. We don't ask you to really know too many dates. You just kind of need to know the flow of things and some of the main ideas, right? I can write a number of them in the chat when we're done here, people that you should definitely familiarize yourself with. So anyway, you have the Council of Trent, right? The Catholics trying to reaffirm their doctrine, okay? To reaffirm their church practices and things like that. They're kind of patting themselves on the back, as I said. They're basically saying to themselves they're doing nothing wrong. And just paving the way forward, right? So you have the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, as this group that's founded to kind of try to spread Catholic doctrine around the world, right, through education, but also through mission work in places like the New World at this point, right, and also other areas in Europe and even in Africa, some mission work in Asia, right, as we start to get the spread of colonialism around the world. We also know that they also crack down. You have the Inquisition, right, this harsh pushback against heretics, people that did not believe, non-believers, but also people that really spoke out against Catholicism and the church, or acted against them, right? So you have torturous things happening to some of these people depending on, you know, where you are in the world at the time. Burning at the stake. You have drawing and quartering here on the rack. But we do know also that things are going to start to slowly get better here, right? You have the growth of secularism, so the growth of excluding religion from public affairs and even education, right? People kind of are sick of this war and sick of the troubles that are coming with it, so they kind of push away from it, right? You have the ideas of individualism and the growth of religious tolerance as a point that's happening as a result of these things, right? You're also going to get the printing press, right? And the printing press is going to grow literacy. I mean, yes, you do need to know definitions, I suppose, as far as like what they are, right? So you need to know what Protestantism is, and you should be able to link up Lutheranism to his ideas, right? Things like that. I mean, we're not going to necessarily be asking questions on strict definitions, but you need to know that what these terms kind of mean, for sure. So anyway, the role of the printing press, right, is having the Bible now printed in these different languages allows people to read, right, and grow literacy rates, but it also allows people to interpret the Bible and interpret these things themselves, right? And with the printing press, you're also going to now have the spreading of other ideas, which will lead to the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution and things like that, right? So that's it. That's really not too bad. I've only been talking here for less than half an hour. I know it takes a lot longer in class, but it really... it's not too bad. There's not so much stuff. So as far as people go, let me just throw a bunch in chat right here. So give me a moment to do that. Right? I would say you need to know. Oh, my dog just walked in. You need to know Machiavelli. So that would be your Renaissance people, I would say. So as far as Reformation people, you should know John Wycliffe. Might be spelling that a little wrong, right? He's English. You should know John Huss. You should know Martin Luther. You should know John Calvin. You should know King Henry VIII. You should know Elizabeth for sure. Elizabeth I. And then that's kind of it for Reformation people. You should know about the Habsburg family, right? Those are people. I think that's it. I can't think of too many more. Give me one more second to scan through this real fast. Oh, I got one. Cardinal Richelieu. Might be spelling that wrong. A little bit wrong, probably. So I would know for sure the Edict of Nantes. You should know the Council of Trent. So it's pretty easy, I think, to pick out words that you should familiarize yourself with, right? You should know that Huguenots are French Calvinists. I think that's about it. You should know the 30 Years' War, right? 30 Years' War. I'm just throwing a whole bunch of terms in here. You should know what the Holy Roman Empire is. You should know the Habsburgs, right? Cool. I think we're good. That's a bunch of stuff. I think that's most of the terms you would need to know anyway. You need to, obviously you need to know the flow of things and whatnot. But, all right, any more questions before we sign off? Good luck for those that are taking it tomorrow. I'll see you in class bright and early. First period. Get about 15, 20 more seconds here for the last sorts of questions. I can just answer them in the chat, though, so I'm going to turn off the video feed right now.